Hello, and welcome as we come now to the fourth Sunday of Advent. This is the weekend that immediately precedes the celebration of the birth of the Lord. And the readings this time, as always, the first reading, I shouldn't say as always, but most often, comes from Isaiah chapter 7, verses 10 through 14. The second reading, the opening section of Paul's letter to the Romans, chapter 1, verses 1 through 7. And then the gospel from Matthew, chapter 1, verses 18 through 24. Now, as you may know, there are only two gospels that tell the story connected with the conception and the birth of Jesus, and that would be Matthew and Luke. Around the 25th of December, we basically draw our images and our understanding from Luke's story. And so today, on this fourth Sunday weekend of Advent, we listen to part of the opening chapter of Matthew's story and his version, very different in certain ways, as we will notice, from of the birth of Jesus. It actually has two major sections. The first part and it's all found in chapter 1 of Matthew's story. The first opening 17 verses, this is of chapter 1, give a genealogy. And that particular genealogy is used in the Vigil Mass for Christmas, which in most cases is probably not used because the Mass that is used in the Vigil on the 24th is generally that from Luke and from the Gospel tradition. Be that as it may, there are two genealogies in the Scripture, in the New Testament tradition. One in Matthew, that's the one that precedes the episode that we're going to look at this time, and the other in Luke, which begins in chapter 3 of Luke's Gospel. So even the way in which genealogies, which are very different, by the way, are used, are placed differently in the scriptural tradition. So chapter 18 through 24 is sometimes called Matthew's version of the birth of Jesus. Now, what is the episode that we're going to look at? In Matthew's story, the centering figure tends to be Joseph. When we look at Luke's story, we find that the often centering figure around which not everything, but much of the story of Jesus' birth and conception take place is Mary. The story begins, or the episode begins, that Joseph is betrothed to a maiden or a woman named Mary. Now, keep in mind, and I'm sure you're probably familiar with this, but just a little quick review, that betrothal in first century world in which Joseph and Mary grew up was part of the marriage process. Betrothal was the process. Now, you will remember that this took place an arrangement which was made between the families of Joseph and the family of Mary. In most cases, when couples were united in marriage, it was not that they kind of chose to marry one another, much like 21st century is, and couples kind of dated and fell in love, and then a betrothal or an engagement was announced. That was not the way in which the first century world worked. Betrothal ceremony took place between the parents of the two persons, between the father of Joseph mother, and between the father and mother of Mary. And usually these ceremonies took place in which, and as I say, these were arranged marriages by parents, and the idea was to join extended families rather than individuals. The bride, in this case, did not expect love, companionship, or comfort from her spouse. These arrangements were often for political and economic advantages of both families. Now, we don't know a lot about the family of Joseph and the family of Mary, but we do know that the arrangement was made. And between, by the way, the time of the betrothal arrangement and the actual marriage ceremony usually was the space of about a year's time. So it was, in this case, the bride's family, father, but family, would receive gifts in order to win from the groom's family the consent to this formal union. By the way, the bride's father made the final decision as to whether or not this betrothal took place. All right, we know something of the customs, and that's the way in which it was done. Now, they did not live together. The bride and groom lived with their family, so betrothal period was not a period of living together, although it was expected that since this arrangement had taken place, they each would remain, kind of faithful to one another and not wander off into any other kind of relationships. Now, that's a little bit of the background, because as Matthew opens his story, Joseph discovers that his betrothed wife is pregnant, is with a child. Now, that, of course, would come as quite a shock, not only to Joseph, but also to the families. And we're not sure just how much they knew about this. What's always at stake here, something we have mentioned on numerous occasions, was what was called as the honor code. And you have to always they always had to be very careful. And the honor code here was that no one takes what belongs to another. So if Mary is perceived as pregnant, she has taken something, so the theory would be, from Joseph and Joseph's family, and that would put things in a difficult situation. So we discover, as the episode unfolds, that Mary's child is not Joseph's. And thus we can understand that he hesitates, that is, Joseph hesitates to take Mary any further into the relationship or into his house. So the honor code is very important here, because with Mary being pregnant, Joseph cannot publicly display that his wife-to-be is with child. And so what does he decide to do now? His decision is interesting and kind of noble here. He decides that he will break the relationship. He will, in a sense, create a divorce between his betrothed wife and not only that, but betrothed family. Now, there were bylaws that that allowed a man to do this, to return Mary to her family rather than to expose her to Well, actually, she could be exposed to death, okay? So if you want the full story of this in the tradition in which they grew up, go to the book of Numbers in the Pentateuch, in the Old Testament, to chapter 5, and read through verses 1 through 31 to determine what could happen to a woman if she were found in this position. So they were very serious about honor and dishonor and shame. And so Joseph here is pictured, therefore, as defending the honor of all involved by sending her back to her father, hopefully that he or their family will discover who the real father is, and thus save the honor of all the families. We stress that because this honor value was very important. There was a phrase that floated around at this time, and this now brings us to the next part of the little story that we're looking about. Old men dream dreams, young men see visions. And so what appears now is Joseph's decision to put things back into a certain order by breaking the betrothal service and putting Mary back with her family, is that Joseph receives a dream. Now, if you're familiar with the scripture and read it, you will find that there are, even in Matthew's account, by the way, in the opening chapter here, lots of dreams, okay? So you have Matthew chapter 1, verses 20 through 21, in chapter 2, verses 13 and 19, and then, of course, you have the astrologers, the men from the east also have dreams. So dreams are an ordinary way, in this way of presenting things, of receiving knowledge. So Joseph receives a vision or dream from whom? From the Lord. Now, some have noticed that Joseph has a contemporary model in the Joseph found in the book of Genesis. You will remember that Joseph was one of the sons of Jacob, and he was known as the dreamer. And I'm sure you're more than perhaps familiar with the number of dreams that Joseph received. Some of the dreams got him in trouble when he told his family, that is the Joseph of Genesis tradition, told his family that there were lights in the sky and stars, and there was one star, and they all bowed down before him. Joseph got sold into slavery. A dream gets him out of prison. So if you're not familiar, this would be in the latter part of the book of Genesis, Joseph, and how his dreams determine his life. Now, is this the kind of pattern that Matthew certainly is aware of? Joseph the dreamer. And so in the dream, and this would be the way in which divine revelation was given, and the motherhood of certain women in the Old Testament, by the way, was a little at times fuzzy or different. I do want to point out, just as a little aside here, that there was the divine intervention for motherhood that sometimes happened with regard to a figure like Rebecca, who was the wife of Isaac, of Hannah, who became the mother of Samuel. And the idea here is that in some way God intervened and allowed conception of a child to take place where it was not expected or had not really had happened. So that brings us back to this story where the visionary tells Joseph, "Do not be afraid to take Mary into your house, for she has been blessed by God." Now, there are no explanations here as to how this happened, only that it is by God's special action that Jesus is conceived. Matthew is not really interested in going into perhaps what we might be concerned about is the biological way in which conception takes place. That is not his concern or the concern of the visionary, but the concern of the visionary is that Joseph be open to bringing his betrothed wife into his home. And that's what, when he wakes up, is what Joseph does. And that's the story that we hear this time. That's the way in which Matthew sees the conception of Jesus taking place. It doesn't explain how it happens, only that it happens and that it's the action of God, and asks Joseph, by the way, in Matthew's story, to not only take the child, but also will give him the privilege to name him. And he will be named Emmanuel, which of course is one of the more popular and important words here. God is with us, or God's house is with us. So all of that, in a way, is a promise made to Joseph, and the honor code is preserved, and the entrance into our world, as Matthew sees it, happens, as in both cases, also in Luke, through the action of the divine, through the action of God. So that's the story we look at this time. As I say, it is not usually the Christmas story that is told, mainly because it's perhaps not as colorful and as dramatic as that of Luke. But it is important. The next time that we meet any figure in Matthew's story, Jesus will have been born. It's interesting, we're not even sure where Jesus is born in Matthew's story, although when he is there, he is discovered by the Magus, by the wise men. It is in a house in Bethlehem. So did Joseph and Mary come down from Nazareth, or were they already living in Bethlehem? There are a lot of unanswered questions which we really need not worry about, and I just mention that because we have an opportunity here to explore some of the perhaps possible questions that that people raise or think about, okay? But that's the situation that Matthew presents. Now, the quote here, it is perhaps one of the most important quotes used not only by Matthew, but also in other places in the New Testament, comes from Isaiah 7, verses 10 through 14. Now, there's a background here to the episode that is recorded in Isaiah. In the year 733, King Ahaz of Judah was unsuccessfully attacked by Israel and Syria. Now keep in mind, at this point in Jewish life, the kingdom of Palestine is divided into two sections. The kingdom of the north, called Israel, the kingdom of the south, called Judah. And what had happened was that the kingdom of the north, that is Israel, had tried to take over the southern kingdom, and it had been unsuccessful. In fact, the kingdom of the north, Israel, had gotten the forces of Syria, which would be north of them, to join them in the attack. So that had been unsuccessful, but the tension still was very real between the two. Now, a little bit of background with regard to Achaz, lest he be seen as too noble a fellow, had killed his son. That is, Achaz had killed his own son. Sounds a little familiar to some of the news today, doesn't it? Who was the heir to David's throne. And if he were to be conquered and captured by his enemies, he too would be killed. So that's the danger here, as there's kind of the forces of the north again gathering. That would end in a certain way the Davidic line, because David had, of course, come from the tribe of Judah, from the southern tribe. So that kind of is hazily in the background. What Achaz had done, had asked a guy, now I'm not sure I say his name correct here, Tiglath-Pileser of Assyria, to rescue him. So Achaz realizes that the forces are coming against him. He needs some ally to kind of protect him, and so he has asked for help. That's the background in which Isaiah now comes before Achaz, and apparently Isaiah brings with him his son, which also kind of plays a little bit mysteriously into this whole situation, and comes up to Achaz and says to him, ask from God a sign who will help you in what is the possible threat to your throne and to your life. And the response that is given is Achaz says, well, I won't tempt the Lord. I don't need a sign. I won't ask for a sign. Now, keep in mind what I just said. It isn't that Achaz didn't have a plan already in mind, and he's not quite sure what it is that Isaiah's understanding is all about. And it is then that Isaiah, quote is, behold, a woman shall bear a son, and he shall be called Emmanuel. That is, God's house or God's presence is with us. Now, keep in mind that when Achaz was invited to ask for a sign, we don't know what the sign was. The sign has no limits. He could have asked for anything he wanted. So keep in mind that even when Isaiah suggests to him ask for a sign, we don't know what it was. But still, and that's the point we just made, Achaz isn't going to bite into that. I'm not going to ask God for any sign. Now, is that he doesn't want to be connected with having to carry out something which God might ask him to do because of this? We don't know. Behold, a woman or a virgin. Now, it is perhaps important to notice that a traditional translation of this is, behold, a virgin shall be with child. Now, a virgin, well, what we don't know is who is this woman, who is this virgin? Is she the wife of the king? Did Achaz already have a relationship with her? Would this be the wife of a prophet? We don't know who that prophet would have been. Maybe that's the thing. Virgin. Now, when we understand this, and of course and I think that's the way in which, by the time it enters into the Gospel of Matthew, virgin is understood as, well, one who is not yet married, okay? Could she be a virgin bride? Or is the understanding then the emphasis that, of course, is going to be given as a result of Christian interpretation of this passage, is physically in that condition? In other words, has had no contact with a man. And of course, Luke puts that into the dialogue that Mary has with Gabriel when he announces to her that she is to be the mother, and she says, well, I've no longer had, I rather have not had physical contact. So the Christian interpretation of this particular little phrase, one of the most famous, is that, behold, a virgin shall be in child, is a wonderful way in which the kind of announcement of the birth of Jesus, or rather importantly, the conception of Jesus, takes place. And so those are some of the questions that are raised here. Some believe that the word virgin, that is in the Greek of that, which means a state of physical condition, was the way in which Isaiah had it in mind. Or did he? Does it simply, and I don't mean simply here is not important, but indicate that there is a woman here not yet formally married who will be or is the bride? Some speculate, and again, there's a lot of speculation going on here, that Achaz, knowing that he might be attacked by forces outside the city of Jerusalem, had sent his virgin bride into the wilderness for the sake of protection. Doesn't mean he just sent her, he sent an entourage to protect her. And it was there that a child was born, and he was named Emmanuel, and that title belonged to one of the kings known as Hezekiah. So there's a lot of other kind of discussion. Those who study Isaiah as one of the prophets give us. So you see, it looks very easily understood when we present it, and the way in which Matthew has crafted it, and that is certainly a very helpful understanding. But it might also, just in passing, be important to see that virginity, namely the physical condition, is not necessarily the important issue here. The important issue is that God is at work in the conception of Jesus, namely as the Savior, and that works quite well. So I do spend a little time there on this Isaiah passage because it is one of the more quoted ones, and it is particularly quoted because of how Matthew has used it. So as we gather this weekend, once again, listening to a preparation for the celebration of the birth of Jesus, we have Matthew's very important and very interesting account. And I think it's important also to notice that certainly Jesus is conceived through the grace and action of God, but that Joseph is more than a bystander here. Joseph plays a very important part in the development of these stories connected with Jesus and in his early life. In fact, if you read on in Matthew's story, after the coming of the Magi, there is a danger and a threat to Jesus, and Joseph, again, through a series of dreams, is able to protect both mother and child from outside forces. Well, hopefully you will have, next time we will meet, the story of the birth of Jesus in the Lucan tradition will have been celebrated. Hope that everyone has a very blessed celebration of the birth of Jesus once again, and that if Joseph had many dreams of a world that could be very different, perhaps our dreams at this Christmas season are also that he who is born again will be a man of peace and of justice for all. Wishes for a very happy Christmas to all.